Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I just start a little bit later tonight. Okay. Just give it a moment. Looks like I'm live. It's all good. We're going to start with a few deep breaths just to kind of settle in. Got my phone over to the side. So that I can check comments for anyone who pops in. Before we start, I need to remember to hit record. Let me see here. There we go. Okay. So, welcome to our November class. Tonight we are going to discuss grief. Now, this class was harder to put together than I thought it would be, especially because I have so much experience with it, but it was kind of bringing some stuff up. So I know for me, I need to take a few breaths and kind of just ground from the day. I didn't have an opportunity before I popped in. So anyone who's here popping on live or catching the replay, #replay. And let's just start with like 5 just big deep breaths. If you need extra support, one hand or two hand over your heart. You can breathe in and out through your mouth or in through your nose, out through your mouth. And just make sure those exhales are longer than your inhales, and that'll help your body to kind of relax. Kind of shake it out if you need to. Imagine yourself letting go of the day and any worries you've had. Close your eyes or keep them open. A couple more breaths. Okay. So we're going to go over a few different subjects today. We are going to talk about different types of grief and what that can kind of look like, how to support another person with that who's going through a hard time if you're not going through it, the same type of loss, and also how to support yourself. So as always, I start with a quote. And this one, I couldn't find like a really great one that I thought fit well, but the one that I found, it said, deep and poignant distress caused by or as if by bereavement. And then the second one was a cause of such suffering. So that was interesting. So we're going to go through some types of grief. Now there's 9 types that I have. There was another article I found that had like 16, but I thought let's go through a few less, and we'll just kind of we'll cover the bases. So the first one we have here is a non-death loss. Now, I know it's kind of widely understood when people talk about grief. I think for the most part, myself included, I think of the loss of a loved one. But there's so many other ways that we can feel grief and be impacted by it. So some of the non-death losses can be loss of employment. I know I felt that. Illness or injury, trauma, divorce or separation, mental or physical illness, disconnection from your friends or family, infertility, empty nest, addiction, life transitions, and moving. And a couple of these kind of fit into other categories as well. But these are all basically big life changes, especially if we tie our identity to it, like a job or a relationship. When those things break apart or change, we can feel like we've lost a part of ourselves. So that's one of the underlying currents, I would say, with grief, is we're losing a part of ourselves. Our life has been shaken up, and we have to adjust to a new norm, and sometimes we don't know what that looks like. Number 2 is anticipatory. So this is like in anticipation of a loss or something. We are seeing what's coming down the road and already grieving it. So illness, if you have a loved one who's ill, especially if it's terminally ill, you can already be grieving them, knowing that you're going to lose them in the foreseeable future. People engaging in risky behaviors, you can be fearful of them hurting themselves or killing themselves by accident, especially with like addiction or just what's the word? It's another word for risky, but just being impulsive, right? Say they drive too fast or something, they've got a motorcycle, you might worry about them, like, oh, I hope they don't hit gravel or something, or get into an accident if they're not driving safely. The impending ending of a relationship, if you know that a relationship, whether romantic or platonic, is kind of breaking down, you can start to grieve that before it has officially ended. And anticipatory grief can also arise during times of celebration. It can be before the first anniversary or an anniversary or a birthday of someone who's passed that you love, or your own milestone. You can be grieving that person leading up to that event that they won't be at. And sometimes the anticipatory grief leading up to the event can be harder than the actual day itself. Not always, but it can be. And thinking about the inevitability of our own death or the death of a loved one, or having fear of the unknown, that can cause grief. Number 3 is traumatic. So any real like traumatic sudden loss, the ones that they listed here, death of a child at any time or any age, obviously, that I just can't even fathom that. The death of a parent that is unexpected and or sudden, death of a partner or spouse, same way. But really just anyone really close to you. It doesn't have to be a child, parent, or spouse to be valid or traumatic. It can be anyone that you love dearly. A homicide or suicide, both would be very traumatic losses, right? Number 4 is a secondary loss. Now, secondary loss is as a result of a primary loss. Makes sense, right? Now, so say you lose your job. A secondary loss that would cause grief would be instability, like financial instability as a result of that job loss, right? You could, in my recent case, losing my dad has had aftermath within our family dynamic and loss of loss of a relationship within the family, loss of family members due to things that have happened in the aftermath. But certainly I don't know what it is about when we lose someone, but people just turn into monsters sometimes, to be honest. And as if it's not hard enough to go through the grief, then you have to grieve your loved ones that you never thought you would possibly lose while they're still alive. And I think death really, especially when it's profound, it kind of goes one of two ways. You either band together and you get stronger because of it, and you hold each other and walk through it together, or you break apart. And I've seen both in the case of losing my dad. It's been devastating, but that's a secondary loss. I've lost family members and my relationship with them in the aftermath from losing my dad. You can have a loss of community, loss of faith and beliefs, especially if you lose someone and you're just like, it can really shake you to your core if you have a belief system. You can have a loss of self and or identity. I have been going through that. I don't know how to do life without him. And even Saturday will be a year and a half, and my head still shakes because of it. It still doesn't feel real. You can have a loss of hopes, dreams, and your future plans, because again, when your life gets shaken up very badly, it doesn't have to be the loss of a loved one, but we've talked about, you lose your job, or say you lose your home in a natural disaster or something. It's just like, it's hard to just, everything feels unknown and unsafe in some ways. You can have a loss of health, a lost sense of security and or stability, like I was saying with the home, and a loss of time. That's the secondary loss. Number 5 is ambiguous loss. So that is, the examples here are, let me just so ambiguous loss occurs when you're not sure about what exactly you've lost, but you feel this sense of loss that lingers, or when something or someone has profoundly changed or disappeared. So there's a high sense of ambiguity when the details of loss are unknown, when you're uncertain if things will get better or return to normal. So it's kind of like, it's like being stuck in limbo. You're not really sure what's next or what to do about it. This can be grieving someone that's still alive, also goes with that anticipatory grief. Loss of a closeness or physical proximity or separation from someone or something, or relationship dynamic changes. You're physically present, but someone is physically present but psychologically absent, like with dementia or Alzheimer's. Someone disappears, you no longer have contact with someone, or you get estranged from someone. That's an ambiguous loss. I just need to take a drink. Now, number 6 is non-finite loss. And this goes for situations like how things should, in quotations, look versus how they are. So when you put expectations on something, so ideas and expectations about the natural order of life events, and uncertainty about what is going to happen. So as we know from previous topics and stuff, the more that we can surrender and separate ourselves, take that step back and that mindfulness around things, the more we can kind of release, or at least become aware of the expectations we put on things, so we can become a little bit more flexible about them. Number 7 is cumulative grief. Now, this is a suffering a new loss before the last one has been processed, and or multiple losses in a short period of time. I can fully relate to that, because my favorite aunt, my auntie died 4 months after my dad unexpectedly, and to this day, it's been over a year now, it still feels like I haven't come to full terms with it because I was so in the depths of just having lost my dad that um I feel like I didn't have the capacity to even kind of go there. Sometimes I visualize grief as like, the suitcase and the situation, these feelings that need to be unpacked and kind of worked through, and part of that situation is it's a big suitcase and it's pushed to the back of the closet, and I'm not ready to look at it, or yeah. It's sometimes it's just like that when you have losses so close together, and they're very, especially when they're profound. Now, number 8 is collective grief. So this is like natural disasters. We see things on the news, and there's a hurricane, and just losses of life and homes and devastation. We all kind of feel that collectively, right? We see the photos and the video, and we hear the stories, and we all want to help, and we feel the pain collectively, even though we don't maybe know anyone directly through that's going through this. The death of a public figure, celebrity, it's interesting how that happens. And I've been reading a book called what is it? I think it's called Grief Brain. I'm gonna grab it. It's just here in my bag. The Grieving Brain. And it was talking about why we grieve celebrities and stuff, but there's a familiarity and stuff around it sometimes. So it is normal to grieve the loss of someone we don't know, especially if they've had an influence on our life, because the first example I can think of is a musician, right? Because we can connect so deeply with song lyrics. So if you have a favorite musician and their music has brought you through difficult times, you can feel a connection to them because through their music, so that when they die, you can grieve them. Another form of collective grief would be like a terrorist attack or a pandemic, climate change, and the disconnection from the natural world, which we're going through all of those things right now globally. And number 9 is disenfranchised grief. So these would be types of grief that aren't always accepted or understood by society. Some of the subjects can be taboo in nature in terms of like being open and talking about it. Thankfully, I think we as a society we're moving forward with a lot of these stigmatized subjects of loss. We're starting to talk about it more so that it doesn't have the stigma that it did. Examples of these would be pregnancy loss, including abortion and infertility, right? Miscarriage. Very widely not talked about until more recently, right? And women still feel shame to talk about it sometimes. I think especially with abortion, because there can be a whole lot of feelings and beliefs around that, right? But certainly don't want to discredit miscarriage and infertility journeys as well. I'm so grateful and admire all the women who are talking about it, so we can have these conversations, because when people start to talk about things, we can start to normalize it, because they are really normal human experiences. A lot of people go through these things, and the more we can talk about it, the less we can feel alone about it. This can include adoption that doesn't go through, right? You're on your way, you've talked about it, and then it falls apart, and that's would absolutely cause grief. Loss of mobility or health. Definitely, it's again, that's tied to kind of how you identify, right? And what you're able to do, and pride, and I can't think of the word right now. I'll think of it after. And especially if someone gets injured or something, say I guess the idea that was coming to mind is an athlete, right? And it ruins their career. there would be so much grief with that because it's tied to their identity. It's part of who they are. Um, yeah. We have loss of relationship that's stigmatized or seen as insignificant. So an ex-partner, it's like, oh, well, they weren't together that long. Well, if they pass away, love is love. It doesn't matter how long you've been together. A coworker or a pet. A pet can be a big one. A lot of people don't understand that unless you've had and loved a pet and lost it. I think there's definitely some misunderstanding around that, and people just don't seem to get it. The way that a person died can be disenfranchised. Examples could include suicide, overdose, especially still maybe less so than like back maybe in the 70s and 80s, but like HIV and AIDS, right? That was very stigmatized, especially because they didn't understand it. And another example, like DUI, driving under the influence. The way in which we're grieving can be stigmatized. So if the person thinks we've been grieving too long or too, I don't know, they could say we're too dramatic about it or just not getting a grip. And there's no real normal way to grieve. Everyone does it differently, and there's no shame around it. So fall apart or don't. Your grief journey is your grief journey. When the person grieving is not recognized as the griever. So you think, well, you shouldn't even be grieving that loss. Like maybe you weren't that close. What does it matter? Grief is grief. And the last couple, not directly experience the loss, yet feeling the impact. So I guess similar to the last one. And the grief and loss that comes with trauma. So even if it's not a death, you can feel grief and loss after a traumatic experience. Now, just to touch really quickly on the stages of grief, we don't need to go deep into it. You may or may not be familiar with it. There's kind of 5 stages, and I used to think they were linear, but they're really not. And I think it's more, there's more understanding now, because I think when I was taught the stages of grief, maybe I was just interpreting it that way, but it was my understanding that they were kind of like linear in a sense. But having more experience with grief, they absolutely aren't, and there's no timeline with it. But the stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And you can feel all of those things in the same day. You can feel multiple ones in the same moment. It's bizarre. I can't explain it. They're all painful. And they all kind of pop up here and there. And yeah, there's no like straight path through grief. It's different for every person, and every loss can be different as well. There's so much complexity with just like the dynamic of how you knew the person, if we're talking about like death of a loved one. And then of course all the other subjects are a whole other thing too, right? And I wanted to go through, I found another article. Now I will have them linked for those of you in the Living on Lemonade group, these will be linked in the presentation. So you can go and read these articles if you want. I did a little research and kind of used a few articles to put them together. So I want to reference them in the notes so you can see where they came from. But I want to go through a few grief truths that I think were kind of well explained in this one article, and I was like, I related to them. So I thought these are good to go through, because when I first lost my dad and was making some posts about grief and how to support others, and this is something I want to do more about. I haven't felt inspired right now to kind of jump back into it. But some of these things I've kind of talked about, and I was surprised that I had people give me great feedback and thank me for having these conversations and making these, I don't know, reels or stories, whatever I was making, just to kind of like bring light to it so that anyone who wanted to reach out to me could feel comfortable, because I had people saying, well, I just don't know what to say, and I don't want to remind you, right? So I wanted to address some of those things. So here's a few others. I've done many of these things myself. Mm, just kind of getting caught in the moment and feeling a little awkward, because even as someone who's very familiar with grief, sometimes you get caught off guard. So I think it's important that we give ourselves and others around us grace as much as we can. So let's keep going. The some of the points here from this article are: people mean well and they say stupid things. So true. There's especially at like funerals, or the visitation the night before, and they go through the line and hug everyone. Yeah, I've heard some, and also probably said some really stupid things, just like getting caught up in the moment, having something prepared, and then I just get a little flustered or whatever. But people really, they do want to comfort you, but especially if they don't have the experience, they haven't gone through anything like that, it's really hard to know what to say. Another point they made that I think can be true in a lot of ways is nighttime can be the hardest time. Especially when we're trying to kind of wind down. I know in those first few weeks, nighttime was probably the roughest for me. I cried myself to sleep a lot of nights, and just those big, heavy, like can't breathe cries. Because that's kind of when you wind down, and your mind starts doing its thing, right? You can try to keep yourself busy during the day, but as you're laying down to sleep, some of it can come crashing in and just like hit you like a rogue wave. Some days it's not day by day, it's second by second. And I've told people that a million times. Like it's minute by minute, second by second, one step in front of the other. And sometimes we just have to break it down more than a day at a time, just to get through the day. Take help. If you're grieving, take help even when you don't want to. People can be incredibly kind and helpful. And I know, I think a common thing is when we are in the midst of that and we're going through a hard time, whatever type of grief it is, whatever life circumstance is happening, we don't always know what we need. So even if someone were to ask us, we might not know how to respond. So if people are offering to help us, just take it, take the help, take the love. Find people who are willing to listen is so important, because one of the worst things in the aftermath of going through a difficult time is wanting to talk about it, or talk about that loved one, and not having anyone to. And the knowledge that grief makes people uncomfortable, I would say it's still probably one of the most kind of taboo subjects. Of people just don't know how to navigate it because it is so incredibly complex. Like I said, people not only do we grieve differently, like compared to each other, but every grief within our own, or sorry, every loss within our own experience can be different. We can navigate things differently each time depending on who or what we're losing. Friendships will change through grief. I've had people be incredibly supportive, and I've had friends kind of drop off the face of the planet who I never thought would. So that's kind of that secondary grief, where then it's like, well, I never thought I wouldn't be close to this person, and I just lost a parent and haven't heard from them since I told them. And that's a tough one to swallow sometimes. And another one, you won't get a gold star on the 1 year anniversary. There's so much anticipation and I think dread and lead up to some of these anniversaries. First birthday without them, not only our own but theirs, holidays, and then of course their first anniversary. Yeah, there's no glory in it, that's for sure. I think I said this earlier, give yourself and others grace. It's a difficult, it's just a difficult subject. Um, and I sometimes I find myself judging others, especially when I feel like I I need the support and I'm not getting it. Like those friends that are kind of absent from my life now, and I never thought it could be possible, but I have to remind myself that A, they haven't lost a parent, they don't know what I'm going through, and B, we all have our own struggles, right? So, um, there's people in my life who have lost people, and I haven't shown up the best. Well, I've shown up the best that I can, but not to my full capacity because I don't have the capacity because I'm going through my own thing. So I have to remind myself that other people are going through things too. It is okay to talk or not talk about your loss. That can get tricky because sometimes people, they don't want to ask you about it because they're afraid that it'll remind you. But what I can tell the people who are afraid to ask their loved one about that person, or just talk about it, there's no way they're not thinking about it already. They're in it. It's like this bubble around us we can't break away from. It is like part of who we are. We're figuring out how to exist in this new reality. So you're not gonna hurt them by reminding them if they happen to forget about it for a moment or whatever. I think if anything, from my own experience, it feels comforting that they've brought that person up or they want to hear about them. And then the griever gets to decide whether they want to talk about it or not, right? Um, Grief might knock you down when you least expect it. That goes with all those life experiences, right? And just as you're navigating the new norm and what that looks like. Couple last ones. Tears and sweat are healing waters. I truly believe that. I haven't had as much sweat, I would say, but I'm finally moving my body again. But certainly the tears. If you feel it building up, I feel my chest gets heavy, it gets tight, and it just feels like it starts to bubble up, and I just have to let it out. So, um, I think going through a deep loss, it's easier for it to just come out. Sometimes I've never cried so easily since I lost my dad. Sometimes the tears just stream down my face and I don't even try. And I just let it happen. Honestly, you gotta let it out, or uh, I think it would overwhelm me and sink me. And the last, oh, I guess there's one more side. One of them is you're not crazy. I think that's hopefully it's self-explanatory, but it's not always. So whatever you're going through, you're not crazy. It is really freaking hard. There's no magic button to fast forward healing. I wish there was. You just got to go through it. I think you need to, I truly believe in the saying, you feel it to heal it. Um Having said that, feeling too much can really put us in a dark place. So we have to be mindful and know ourselves enough to know when we're starting to go down that dark kind of point of no return, and what tools do we have in place to keep us from slipping off the edge. But certainly I've always been an emotional person, and I believe in feeling my feelings and letting it out when I'm not deep in grief. And I've had like, just a buildup over months, and it's like, oh man, I can tell I haven't cried in a while. I'll sit down and watch a sad movie that will just like open the floodgates. I'll have a big release of emotion, like let it out of my body. There's a huge sigh. My body feels more relaxed and just softer and less tense after. Um, there's a release and a relief there. So there's a balance that we have to play between feeling, but also like coping and not going too far into the darkness, if that makes sense. The hardest part is getting your head and your heart to match. So true. Acceptance and just like learning to live again in a new way. And lastly, you will know joy again. Might take a while, but do it. You have to get those friends together, get those tools together, and we're gonna transition into coping with grief. Now I have another article here that's really good. Basically, coping skills are thoughts and actions you use to respond to events that may cause you distress, and we consciously put them into place so that we can manage our emotions. They don't necessarily resolve the situation, but basically they help us from maybe hurting ourselves or doing something, right? Like they keep us on a healthy track. 'Cause coping skills can be simple tactics that you use in the moment as you feel your emotions rise. They can also be long-term strategies that you focus on when you're going through extended difficult periods, like when you're grieving. Not all coping skills help you relieve distress. Some may actually delay the process, and some of them may put you or someone else's safety in jeopardy. So, next up is avoidant versus active coping skills. So, it says here when you experience grief, you may find yourself working with active or avoidant coping skills. It may depend on the situation or how you're used to managing your distressing situations. Like we're not taught how to deal with these things. I mean, we are in the sense of we mimic what we saw growing up, but because we were never taught the healthy ways, we don't necessarily know. I think things are starting to shift in healthy coping skills with parenting and stuff, but many many of us, if not most of us, didn't grow up with those parents having the awareness, and that's because their parents, it's like a generational thing. So active coping means you're directly addressing the source of your emotional pain with thoughts or actions that change the event itself or the way that we look at it. So we're getting to the point. Avoidant coping skills are more like strategies that take our mind or our heart off the event. So it was saying, for example, an active coping skill may be asking someone to help you solve a problem, while an avoidant coping skill could be alcohol use. So really, avoidant coping skills would be numbing, finding ways to numb through drugs, alcohol, even social media, right? Just mindless scrolling. There's a numbing to that. And it might turn our brain off of what's happening, but it's not helping us to process it. The problem's not going away. What do we got here? Coping skills versus self-care. So positive coping skills can feel like self-care, but they are different. Both are important, however, when we're grieving or going through a difficult time. So self-care, in a sense, self-care is this coping skill. It does help us manage our emotions and get proactive about our distress and the things that are bothering us. Self-care can include like psychotherapy, going to a therapist, moving our body and exercising, practicing relaxation techniques, journaling is so helpful going through difficult things because it's like you just get it off your mind, and it's like off your mind, out of your body, write it on paper. You don't ever have to read it again, but there's also a release with that. If you haven't tried journaling, I highly recommend at least trying it. Asking for support, going to a doctor for a checkup, reconnecting with family and friends, starting a new hobby, or exploring one you used to like and seeing if you still like it, right? Or picking up a hobby you haven't touched in a while, but you know that you enjoy, or you could pursue academic or professional goals. Um, One second here. Coping skills. I guess I should have said that first before self-care, but it doesn't really matter. Coping skills can look like actively seeking and accepting support from others, acknowledging that we're in a grieving process. We don't have to like it, but when we can come to that certain level of acceptance, that's when we can start to move forward. Otherwise, we're stuck. focusing on solving immediate problems. What do I need to do today to get through the day? I don't have to conquer the world, but like, what are the few things I have to do today? Maybe I have to shower. Maybe I have to go to work. Maybe I have to make dinner tonight. Or, like, what do I have to do? Expressing feelings out loud or in a journal. So some of them are a bit transferable, yeah, uh, between the coping skills and the self care. Learning to recognize emotional triggers, having that self-awareness of like, ooh, I'm starting to slip into that dark place, and catching yourself earlier. Getting involved in activities that you usually enjoy, like I said, hobbies. Being kind and patient to yourself about your process. Give yourself grace. Getting plenty of rest. I think this is so important. And to me, sometimes I can go too far on the one side. I tend to sleep a lot, like maybe too much. But it's kind of always been the way that I've coped, and it's been to my detriment this time because I didn't I wasn't doing any movement really, and I was just sleeping so much, and I'm like, I've gained like 40, 45 pounds. So that hasn't helped or made me feel great. Um yeah, it's made the grief feel heavier for me, but there is a power in resting your body because it's a trauma to the brain. There's a lot going on, and once I finish this grieving book, I think I'll do a follow-up to this because it's really interesting, the the neuroscience around grief and how it changes, like how your brain is basically, it sees this loss, whatever the loss is, it sees it as like a problem to solve. And especially when you lose a loved one, your brain, like, it can't compute that that person no longer exists in like time space. It just doesn't know how. And that is part of the battle and the struggle of grief, is our brain is like not set up to fully understand and click on. We have to have experiences and basically like rewrite and our lives so that a new norm happens. um so the earlier we can pick up on the struggle, especially like mentally and emotionally, um the earlier we can put tools in place, those self-care tools, so that we don't slip into like what feels like the abyss sometimes. um Yeah, and plenty, like I was saying, plenty of rest and setting goals, even if they're small and immediate. If you showered today and that's it, I'm proud of you. Um, and lastly, supporting someone who is grieving. For anyone who doesn't have any or a lot of experience with grief, or maybe it's a different type of grief that someone's going through that you're just not familiar with. I'm just going to take a quick drink. Here's some small things you can do to really help them. First of all, understand that everyone does not grieve the same way, as we've talked about. So just give them grace. It might be foreign to how you've grieved, doesn't mean it's wrong. Simply be there for them. If you can be there physically, amazing, but a short text, and I love you and I'm thinking about you, a text of I hope you're hanging in okay. I'm thinking about you, sending you so much love. Those short, sweet, simple words can mean the difference to someone who is otherwise just like navigating the complete dark. It can be a little bit of light in their day. If you're with them and they don't want to talk about it, I would encourage you to get comfortable. It says here, be silent together. Just be with the person. Just sit there with them. Be okay with not saying anything. It's okay. Sometimes we just need someone to sit beside us, and maybe they hold our arm, maybe they're just sitting there, maybe we're not making like physical contact, we're not hugging or anything. We just like to have the physical presence beside us and not say any words, because sometimes the wrong words come out, or you just I've said it at with to people who have lost someone before, and it's simple, like, there are no words. There are no words I can come up with to say the things that are on my heart, or to explain the loss. There's just no way to explain it. So you can simply say, like, there are no words. And I guarantee that person will understand, because they're probably speechless too if they're going through something unimaginable. Um, whether a loss of a loved one or just something else that is just life changing. Be specific when you're offering help. Like I said before, grievers often don't know what they need. You could ask them, and then there can be like massive brain fog happening. I've had so much brain fog over the last like couple years, but there's overwhelm, right? So it's like, if you can be very specific of like, what can I bring you a lasagna? Can I bring you a food? Can I bring you a grocery store gift card? Can I come and do your vacuuming? Like, specific things, a yes and a no is much easier when they're in the throes of things, especially if it's like right after a death and they have to plan a funeral and make all those arrangements. It's just like, thankfully I haven't had to be in like the throes of that, but I can only imagine how, I can't even imagine, really, honestly, how incredibly overwhelming that would be. So just be specific of like something exact that you can do for them. It says take initiative in practical things, right? You want to help them meet their basic needs, food, make sure, if you have to drive the kids somewhere, yeah, cleaning their house, or just helping them just do those, what we normally would think are mundane tasks, and feel like a mountain when you're in the midst of these life-changing things. So like, what can you do to just help their day either run smoothly or just like get through it? It doesn't even have to be smooth. It says bring food, of course. No one wants to cook when they're in the throes of things. Don't be offended by whatever is happening. Maybe they'll snap on you a little bit. It's just like, again, there's brain stuff happening when you're in that kind of survival, fight or flight, in the aftermath of something happening. So just like, don't take it personally. I'm sure when things settle down, if they even realize they did it, they'll apologize. Invite them out to things. Give them the opportunity to say yes or say no. Don't assume that because they're going through a hard time, they don't want to do anything. It can feel very isolating not hearing from people. And it's like, oh, well, I didn't think you'd want. It's like, well, you didn't even give me an opportunity. Maybe we would have said no, but at least it's like extending the olive branch so somebody knows that you're thinking about them. And whether they or not they feel like partaking isn't the point. It's more about you're thinking about them and you're wanting to include them. Tell them when you see their efforts. If you see that they've had a shower and they've done a thing, let them know, because those small things really aren't small things when it's really rough. So that will mean so much to them if you can just acknowledge and compliment them on getting it things done, or just making it through the day. Maybe they didn't shower, but they answered your text. Like, it's different for everyone, but avoid certain phrases. So trying to think of a few. I find a few that I find are very unhelpful are, the classic, like, they're in a better place. Um, for me, if they were to be like, this was God's plan, when you've just lost your person or something, like that just doesn't make sense. So I know it's well intentioned, but it these things don't land when things are so incredibly emotional, or like at least they're at peace, no more pain. um can be mixed reviews, because yeah, of course, like kind of goes without saying, right? But what about our pain? What about the fact that we don't know how to exist without them? We just want them here with us, and obviously we don't want them to be in pain, but we don't it's confusing, right? As you can see, I'm just like stumbling through, like there's so many thoughts around these things. So um yeah, it's hard to know what to say. So it's like there can be a long list of things not to say, but then that can discourage people from, like, again, then they don't want to say anything. But just tell them you love them, give them a hug, tell them there are no words. Tell them there are no words. If you don't have the words, tell them there are no words, because they'll understand that. I promise. Run interference for them. So if like someone else is, if you can kind of like intercept and help them with things, especially when I read this, I think of like during the funeral prep and stuff, like if things are just kind of blowing up, and you can kind of like step in and take things off their hands, and maybe, someone's being annoying over here, so you can kind of like divert them, and like just try and have your person's back while they're going through the things. It says here, do the thank you notes for them. So if there's thank you notes after the funeral and stuff, certainly jump in and help. Those are those things that someone would really appreciate having the help with. Use touch wisely. Maybe they're not a hugger, so maybe that actually wouldn't be supportive for them. So just kind of like, or just ask them, like, can I give you a hug? Would that be okay? And again, yes or no, they'll tell you. Share your expertise. So if you have like a skilled trade, or just somewhere specifically that you can be very helpful in that time of need, share your magic, share your expertise with them, and help them get through it that way. Yeah, if you're an excellent cook, cook up some freezer meals for them, like whatever you're good at. How can everyone in the community come together with their own special things and kind of help out collectively? Watch out for the warning signs. So if you see their behaviors changing, and you're worried about them, just be aware of that. Remember, this isn't about you. So if they say something a little off, or they just aren't responding, it's not about you. And one thing I'm very clear about when I'm reaching out to someone who's going through a difficult time is I let them know, like, if we haven't kind of gone down this road together already, I say, like, I love you, I'm thinking about you, whatever that looks like in that brief text, just so that they know I'm thinking about them. I also let them know in that text, I don't expect a response. Make that clear, because there can be guilt around that. It can be so overwhelming when you get messages and there's no capacity to respond, and it's just like, oh, I should respond to them, but I can't. So just giving them that relief of like, I'm only here to let you know that I love you. I'm only here to let you know that I'm thinking about you. I'm sending you a big hug. Don't expect a response. If and when you decide you want to reach out, my door's open, my ears are here, my shoulders here, but I just want to be able to reach out so you know that you're being thought of. I think that's important. It's been one of the most helpful things, both for me and reciprocated from people that I've reached out to. They've appreciated that. They don't feel any pressure to get back to me, but they know that I'm thinking about them. And be open to talk about their loved one, or listen to the stories of their loved one. There's really nothing better. I want to talk about my dad all the time, and sometimes it makes me cry, sometimes it doesn't. But there's a special feeling when somebody is open and ready to hear what I have to say, especially because it doesn't have to be like some big story. It can just be like, I could hear his voice in my head over something that like just something in life. triggers a memory. Like every time I see squirrels running around, I think of my dad. Every time we'd see a squirrel, he'd be like, "Oh, they're acting kind of squirrely," and so I hear his voice in my head all day long, and I like to express those things. Sometimes I say the same things he did, and I used to say it when he was alive too. But it's just being able to like be open about that, and it keeps him alive in that sense too. Also, offer to help them find supports or resources. So if you know that they're struggling and it's beyond what you can help them with, look for some resources and say, hey, if and obviously like ask them, say, I've been noticing you've been struggling. Would you be open to this? I'd be happy to look up some contacts or some numbers, right? We don't want to necessarily just like impress it upon them, because we want to allow them to have some autonomy over their own grief process, especially because it's their own. But certainly let them know that, like, hey, I feel like you've been having a really rough go lately. Like, how are you? Are you? If you're having a hard time, I'd be happy to help you look up some numbers or whatever. And actually, what I almost said, and I caught myself, is one of the really difficult things that it can be, especially in the early days after a loss or just something really devastating happens, is asking the person, how are you? I had a little bit of a rant at one point because I was like, I don't want anyone to ask me how I am. I hate when people ask, how are you? Because I don't always know. It can be minute to minute. I can just be like in my a daze, like I don't even know how to articulate or answer that question. And B, um I think it can be, it's just such a casual thing that we say in general, like, how's it going? How are you? Right? Like it's just like part of like how we start a conversation, that we don't think about the weight of it in this context. And I've had people ask me that question who I'm kind of like, I either I don't necessarily want to lie and be like, oh, I'm fine, and then just discredit my own feelings. But I also don't feel comfortable being like, oh, and tell them how I really feel, because that can open a can of worms. And then the person just like, ooh, like I shouldn't have asked. So if you're not ready for that response, certainly don't ask. But also just be conscious of that. I have to say, like, I hated that question. I'm sure that I'm not the only one, because it can be really, really hard to answer. I prefer to just say, I hope you're hanging in. Because that kind of, for me, when I hear that, and it could be different for everyone, of course, right? But it's just like, my association with that is just like, they know that you might not be, and that's okay. And we don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, right? And yeah, there's other ways to kind of open that line of communication, to give them an opportunity to either talk about it or not, without the direct, like, how are you? Because like sometimes it's just like, I have no idea. Allison says, I like to think of Piglet and Winnie the Pooh sitting with someone and just being there. Absolutely. Yeah. No words needed, so the person knows you care and are there if needed. Sometimes those have been the best experiences for me, is just literally having someone sitting there and we don't have to say a word. And another thing that I had started kind of using with some friends that were also going through difficult times, we're all kind of in the throes and we've lost people, and just this sense of having those people in your life that you can be transparent with and say the thing that, again, a lot of people would be uncomfortable with. But for me, I started just having a conversation about, like, can we kind of like a code word, in a sense of just, I can't say this to everyone, but being able to text a handful of people and say, it's dark over here. And that person knows exactly what I'm talking about, because they've been through it. They know what it means. And even if they haven't exactly been through it, we're close enough that they know what it means for me. And that's their cue. That's my way of saying, I'm having a hard time over here. It's dark over here. And they know that it's like, Do you need me to just come sit with you? We don't have to say a word. Do you need to call me and vent and I'll just listen the whole time and I don't have to say a word? What do you need? Right. And it's just like, okay, well, how can I support you? If it's dark over there, how can I support you? Do you want me to come sit in the dark with you? Figuratively or literally? Um, what do you need? That can kind of open up a conversation. So if you can have an understanding with that person of like, how do I, what is it you need to tell, like, what is it you can tell me so that I understand that you're having a hard time, but I don't have to prod and pry with you. But it will open the door enough that I can say, how can I support you? I think that's helpful. All right. This kind of brings us to the end. Any questions? It's again, this is kind of it's a tough subject. I'm glad I did it, but it wasn't. I felt emotional. It was more difficult to put together than I thought. In terms of what is next, I don't have a date yet for the December class or whatever we're going to do in December together. So that will be determined. I'll post it in the group once I kind of figure that out. I was thinking about maybe doing like a vision board night together. We could start out with a meditation, kind of sink in. I can go through a little bit of visualization in different like facets of how we would want to set our intentions in different areas of our life for the year. And then we could maybe work through like work on vision boards together, whether it's a cut and paste from magazines or doing it on Canva. We could do that together as well. So that's an idea I have. If you're watching the replay, or you would like to do it, let me know. I can schedule it. Otherwise, I have a couple other topic ideas we can do. In terms of other things going on, I've got the weekly podcast episodes from the Living on Lemonade podcast. I try and release them every Monday. Once in a while, I get busy, but that's okay. And as always, there's the mindfulness meditation self-study course that you can purchase and have like access to and go through it in your own time. There's 5 modules. And I do the personal and business oracle readings too, if you want a little bit of inspiration in your life or your business. So that's always available. Send me a message if you have any questions, and I think I'll wrap it up. So thanks for hanging out. And I'm sure we'll see you around soon. Okay, bye everyone.